Okay, so I think that's actually running now. That's very nice. Let's see what's actually going on, other than McAfee again. So let's see. I'd like to get to another one of these guys. Oh, I've forgotten the sizes here. I want to get a size. It's been too long, man. It's been too long. I want to get a size for the card face. I did make some mock-ups of the cards, what they're looking like. This particular one didn't look so good, but some of them look alright. So this is what the cards will look like when I get them going. So some of them, like these guys, all actually look pretty good. This guy, early one, doesn't look very good. Some of them look reasonably okay. I have to put them together, see what they look like. The pot farmers, obviously, is pretty awesome. But we'd like to get another couple of these in here. Actually, that doesn't look too bad. It's not good, but it's not too bad. Not as bad as I thought. So let's see. So this is this is 4.5 by 6 by 6. Okay, so that's what I want is a 4.5 by 6 sized thing, and I want to do this sort of voting rightists thing. This is because I think people not only want too many people to vote, or people are too interested in the voting rights question, they want too many goddamn people to vote. And why do I say that? I say that because if you make things easier for people to vote, then basically people who have less incentive to vote, less desire to vote, people who have less of an opinion, less informed opinions, will probably not vote. Now that doesn't mean all of them won't. All the people that shouldn't vote won't vote. But it does mean that a larger percentage of the people who won't vote, right? Who shouldn't vote won't vote. And I know what you're saying. You're saying everybody should vote, and that's because you're a dumbass. But I mean, there were some pretty stupid people. When I did some polling work, right? When I worked the polls, is that the right term? Basically, when I sat there and I was the guy who was directing people to the voting machines, a long time ago. This was when I was in suburban Maryland. Um, is this 2 and 8? 2 and 8. So I believe that's square. I'm not seeing it right. Anyways, when I was doing that, there were people who were probably too deficient to vote. They probably should never have been able to vote, not because, or just because, perhaps, they were, um, they just weren't smart enough. They couldn't. There's no way you can convince me that some of these people were smart enough to have an opinion that should count. You're saying, oh, that's a horrible thing to say. Yeah, but it's completely and totally true. And if you don't believe me, work the polls. I mean, it's kind of nice that the guy with Down syndrome came in and he said he wanted to vote for the president. I'm not sure who he meant, but I kind of get the feeling that what he wanted to do was vote for George Bush. Because this was 2004? Yeah, I was working for NIST 2003 to 2005, that sort of time frame. So 2004 would have been the time I actually looked at it. Like I said, got some people out there in suburban Maryland who were voting who should not have been voting just because they didn't I don't think that somebody just wants to vote for George Bush because he's already the president should be voting. Now, you say other people think you shouldn't be voting, Jim, because hey, you disagree with them. Well, that you got that 180 degrees off. If you're disagreeing with me because I'm the genius and you're the fuck up. Um, you shouldn't be voting, right? But in any event, if you haven't actually tried to tried to explain to people how to use a voting machine, you probably shouldn't. Um, which is basically a screen. If you haven't tried to teach somebody how to use a voting machine, then you probably shouldn't have opinions about how many people should be voting, right? Because man, that is scary. There's no wonder we're in trouble, and that also makes you doubt people who want to make it easier to vote, right? Because if something like having to, oh, I don't know, take an afternoon off from work or something, or something like that, and or something like that is really the reason why you're not voting, then probably you don't care enough about voting in the first place. And people might be saying things like, and because they're ignorant, well, people that work for the fast food restaurants, um, they don't get time off to vote. People who work in the mall, they don't get time off to vote. Well, maybe they can't take time off to vote, but let's be honest, if you've ever worked any of those jobs, which you probably haven't if you're saying something like that, you know that they have schedules that do not line up with the times with where you're supposed to vote. The only people that would really benefit from something like, say, a federal holiday, right? It's stupidest idea. Federal holiday for voting. What does that mean? Well, that means that the state employees get the day off when you vote. It means possibly, but probably not, bank employees, bank tellers would get the day off to vote. But the rest of us would not, right? Anybody who's working in manufacturing will not get the day off to vote just because it's a national holiday. What makes you think that? You're a fucking idiot if you think that, right? So, I mean, it's not like if you're working for an oil company, you get President's Day off, right? You don't get Columbus Day off if you work for the oil companies. You get Columbus Day off if you work for the federal government, right? And we don't have a problem with government workers not voting. So, who the fuck, really, who the fuck do these liars think that they're making something for, making a thing for? They're not making it for poor people. They're making it for the fucking government to vote for itself, right? Goddamn useless shitheads, right? Why would anybody believe anything by somebody so fucking stupid, right? God damn. Your mechanic doesn't get the day off, right? Even if you make it a federal holiday, right? Your mechanic's not going to get the day off. And you don't want him to get the day off. Because why? Well, what happens to you if your car breaks down on voting day, right? Those things don't happen. So the voting rights people are really just trying to most of it's signaling, really. I mean, most of it's they're not really trying to solve a problem. What they're trying to do is they're trying to signal that they care about certain people by doing things that won't help them, but at least it'll make them think, make them feel like they're helping the people that they're trying to help. And Yeah, that's always a bad sign for a policy because they're complete shitheads, complete assholes. Um, so there are places in this world, I think Australia for one, where they are fascist enough to force you to vote, right? But think about that with what I was just saying, right? If you're forcing somebody to vote, you're forcing somebody to vote who, if they wouldn't do it already, is already signaling that they do not want to spend the effort required to have an informed opinion, right? And you say, well, people shouldn't have people shouldn't have to prove to you that they have an informed opinion. That's true, right? That's perfectly fine. But if you're getting rid of barriers, each time you get rid of a barrier, you make it easier for somebody to do something, right? And you're taking people who have a lower barrier to not just voting, but a lower barrier to, when they have a lower barrier to vote, right? You're getting people who have a higher barrier to actually read a fucking newspaper, if there were newspapers anymore, but to actually inform themselves about what should be going on in the world. So, somehow we have these vote Nazis, right? We have these people who think that what we should do is we should make sure that people who have informed opinions do not have their ballots counted. And instead, or maybe not get their ballots counted, but we want to diffuse the want to diffuse we want to diffuse the effect of having informed people make decisions about voting, right? That's very, very scary, right? That's very scary. And you say, why would that be scary? Why would trying to get people who people to vote who don't want to spend the time to inform themselves so much? Why would that be scary? Well, that's scary. This is not looking good. That's scary because okay, we want this to have gone through, so the shoulder should be here. Finished following through on the strike. I'm trying to remember how to do this. They taught me how to do this in the Marine Corps. So they have. So why would somebody want somebody with a higher that needs a lower barrier to vote, and therefore has a higher barrier to informing themselves? Why do they want somebody like that to vote? Why do they want uninformed people to vote? Probably because they think they're easier to control, right? So that's pretty fucking scary if you start thinking about it. The only reason to try to get people who aren't willing to vote, aren't willing to inform themselves to vote, the only reason why you want, something like that is because what you want to do is you want to reduce how much people are thinking about um, how much people are thinking about who they're voting for. Oh crap! Hold on. Fortunately, that was soup. Fortunately, that was soup. Oh. What should we do? Vote or die? Okay, and that's gun rightists. Or no, voting rightists. Excuse me. Oh. Maybe that's not the best thing. What would the NRA be called? Gun rights. I'll have to think of that. There should be a better title for this. I want this to be an issue, really, not a set of electors. So I'll have to think about that. How I want it to feel, how I want it to be. Okay, so let me now do the scary thing. All right, so I want to try this thing. So I've been playing around with my pen again. Actually, I've been playing around with my pen trying to learn how to draw Chinese characters. So, hopefully that will both teach me Chinese characters and make me do better work with the pens, with the brush pen, right? This is not making me feel like I am, but let's do it. So anyways, there's been lots of people. They want more people to vote, but what I want is the right number of people to vote. And the way I want, if you have more people voting, the way I want you to have more people voting is by making their votes worth more. That is to make, when they vote, having their vote have little, let's say, more power over what people are actually going to do, right? Which is not what we have now. I mean, you vote and basically have no power. We have too much federal government, right? At least in the United States, probably even worse other places. And that leads to the problem where people have their votes basically diffused just by having things that probably should be controlled at the, let's say, the state level or the local level, right? At the level where the fewest people should make a decision, and instead they're made at higher levels. Now, at some point, this is good, right? I mean, there are real rights issues, but people can make just about anything into a rights issue, right? So that it doesn't, you say, okay, well, I only want real sort of rights issues to be part of whatever it is. Right? We only want real rights issues. You see, this is not looking good. To be superseded. Oh, this is bad. That guy needs a pen instead of a brush. I don't think she looks matronly enough, do you? That's too bad. It's hard to look matronly with M16. While you're busting somebody over the head with M16. Yeah. Screwed up on that. in a way I shouldn't have. Done this. Use this pen. But you don't get better at things unless you do them. Okay, so yeah, we have this sort of fetishization of voting. We think somehow getting more people involved in voting is important, but at the same time, we make the votes worth less. If we could make the votes worth more and improve, it would probably improve how much we vote on average, right? If we say, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that everybody's vote or every issue is handled at the lowest possible level, right? That local issues are handled at the local level, state issues are handled at the state level, and only federal issues were handled at the federal level, then probably we'd have better voting results or more people voting on average. But instead, we've gotten to this point where we pretend like everything is a federal issue, right? And this goes all the way down to some crazy things like employment, right? So, for some reason, it's a federal issue whether or not I hire you and, you know, how much I pay you and all that other crap. And those laws are made with no thought at all, right? They're only there to entice the sort of people to vote who wouldn't vote otherwise, saying, okay, I'm going to give you some goodies if you vote for me. Okay, let's see. How much of this can I salvage? Okay, so now the nice thing about my M16 is that it's black, or at least the M16 I had when I was a kid. Actually, they were different M16s at different posts, but that's not a big deal. So despite the fact that we do not currently have some sort of law that requires people to vote, I'm afraid that in the long term, if we were to afraid that if we were in the long term we were to go to, say, a federalized voting system, then eventually we'd get to the point where people would be fined, Obamacare style, for not voting. And that's actually probably the worst part of that decision, that said it was perfectly fine to have that particular penalty in the Affordable Care Act, named Orwellingly, named with that sort of Orwellian language that they use, right? Because despite all the promises, healthcare or health insurance costs went up, and the only people that made out were the insurance companies, because they were the real beneficiaries, right? But that's the way Obama wanted it. I think I should spend more time on this, but yeah, I should. I don't want to do this. This is scary. And now that should have been a little bit lower. And trying to do fonts with a thick Sharpie. Freehand is, what do we call that? We call that stupid, folks. Call this stupid. Okay. Of course, if I should check, but if this is like anything else that I've done, there's nobody there. Okay, so yeah, nobody's there, so hey, who cares? And you see, what I've just done is made it possible for me to completely fail and not get the die in there. You can vote or D, right? Vote or D. Okay, it's not looking too bad considering how I'm doing it, which is stupidly. So anyways, as you may have guessed, I'm against that particular piety. Voting is not something informed people do. Or I shouldn't say that, but crap, I did screw it up. All right. Well, voting is something you'd want informed people to do, but the biggest problem with it is people who are actually informed know, right, that their vote doesn't count. So anybody that you'd want to vote, anybody who's smart enough to vote, right, anybody that you'd like to have vote in your elections will not vote in your election because they are smart enough to know that it's useless, that their vote doesn't count for anything. This is a mathematical fact, right? This is a mathematical fact. So anybody who's voting is voting for basically religious reasons, right? So that's why this sort of mouthing off can get me in trouble, is because people who are religious about voting could find it, which they won't because nobody's finding it. And they'd get really pissed off because somebody's calling them on their bullshit. Right? He's saying, yeah, you guys are full of shit. Always have been. All right, that's too much gray. I can go gray above. I shouldn't have that gray in there. Let's see. Get some gray in there. That improves the look a little bit, except I'm not really good with the pens either. Can't ever get the pens to look right. Somebody knows how to make the pens work, and that somebody is not me. Okay. Let me see if I can take a peek at what this looks like over there, because when I'm drawing like this, where's that pen? I cannot see. I'm not at the right angle, so some things end up being bad. So there we go. Did I mention when I came back that I saved my soup? I did save the soup. The soup is fine. You don't have to worry about my soup. Let's see. It's actually a little bit scary. You keep trying to increase the total number of people who vote, but if you think about it, like I was just saying, by increasing the number of people who vote, what you're going to do is you're going to convince the people who actually understand how useful their vote is, or mathematically sophisticated enough to understand how much their vote is worth, that their voting is even less useful. The only thing that's good about that is you've probably already gotten rid of all of them, right? You've probably already gotten rid of anybody who's smart enough to not vote. Everybody else is just being a religious nut. You say, okay, well, do you vote and all that other BS? And I guess, yeah, I do. I didn't for a while, but that was because I was sort of living in multiple states at the same time, so I just didn't want to get in trouble. And you saw that with the Derek Chauvin guy, right? Florida decided to that because he was working somewhere else and he was voting in Florida, even though he owned property in Florida, they were going to prosecute him for voter fraud for being in the wrong state and all that other BS. That's a real problem, right? I already knew about that possible problem, so I thought that the best thing to do was not to do something that somebody could arrest me for, but only if they felt like it, right? I mean, it's one of those things where you as an individual have no control. Most people would never be caught because they just don't enforce them enough. But if somebody hates you enough, they can throw it in there so that even though they don't have a real crime for you, they they can make one up. It should be illegal to vote in the wrong place. It should be illegal to vote twice. But where you actually live is a really weird concept, especially these days, right? So unless we want real protections, so if they want real protections for voting, they should have a federal database of voter registration and force people to give their social security number as they vote. This, by the way, is an election worker. What was I saying? I had a second thing that I was thinking about mentioning. It has to do with voting rights. Okay, so that is about as good as I'm going to do here. All right, let's see. Do I like anything else in there? Maybe some here. Just adding some details just in case. You know what I don't like about her? She doesn't have flowers on her skirt. If you want to make her look like an old lady, she has to have a daisy print skirt. And of course, the person who's supposed to be beating the crap out of you because you're voting or voting the wrong way or screwed up your voting machine or whatever it is that gets voting workers angry should be an old lady. Okay, so it did have the thing I was thinking about did have something to do with federal regulation of voting, right? Because I don't really like the idea for the most part. But oh yeah, I mean it's a January 6th BS, right? So you have these idiots storming the castle or the Capitol, same thing. Have fun storming the castle. Which obviously has to be the best entertainment that we've had in the United States since like 1972, right? Even when I was a kid in the 80s, right? The protests were boring and the protests were rote. I mean, none of these stupid hippie wannabes ever thought of storming the Capitol in a wolfskin. I think the biggest problem with the voting rights stuff is that they're going the wrong way for sort of the trust issues that we're having, right? So we do have trust issues in the United States. You may have noticed. You may not have noticed, but there are some trust issues in the United States, and what we want to do is to improve the trust. Right? We don't want another, what was this thing, January 6th, right? But the big problem with January 6th, the thing that caused January 6th, is that people didn't trust what they were being told to trust, right? People were looking at the election returns and they didn't trust them. And it's not that they didn't trust them after, the elections. They did. I mean, they did. They didn't trust them after the elections, and the elections gave them every reason to not trust the elections. Right? They weren't corrupt, but they had every mark of being corrupt. Right? So that's. Oh. No wonder this stuff is. I just. I think I just dipped my brush in. I think I just dipped my brush in my drinking water again. Okay, this ink is dry. No wonder it's been so hard to use. Um, so let's see. Oh, that looks so much better than the way I've been doing it. This ink has basically been dry since I bought it. It's going on this easy. It's almost like it was meant to spread on smoothly, right? I don't know why it never occurred to me that it would be dry, especially this dry. This is bad. So if we want people to trust the voting system, you don't just tell them, well, you're a bunch of idiots and stuff, right? Obviously we don't have any bad intentions, right? Obviously that stuff you've been telling us that you didn't trust before was okay, even though it had all the hallmarks of something a little bit fishy going on, right? I was listening to a podcast that was taped around then, and not by a bunch of pro-Trumpist people or anything like that, but I was listening to a podcast, and they were talking about it, and you forget that on the day of the election, you go to sleep. Trump has leads in all these critical states, and then they disappear overnight. Now, this is something that happens all the time. It's predictable, and we can something we can probably live with. It's also something we should probably try to solve, right? But it is something we can probably live with. But the way we have to live with it is we have to make sure that everything is above board. Everything not just is above board, but it looks like it's above board, right? And it just didn't look like it was above board the way both the election happened. That sort of reduction there that we saw, that disappearance of, or that appearance of an inordinate number of Democratic ballots. Again, there were good reasons. There are reasons why those things happen. I don't know if they're good or not, but there are reasons why those things happen. They've happened for a long time. But that feeling has made people on the right very, very worried, okay, about the kinds of election reforms that people want to make, mostly just because these election reforms lead to a lot of things just like that. That you go to sleep, and if there's a Democratic victory, if it looks like a Democratic victory, you wake up and it's always a Democratic victory, but when it looks like there's a Republican victory, there's a chance that it will disappear because, some district somewhere decided that it didn't have to turn its votes in until late, which is a little scary. So what you want to do in this situation, or what you need to do, if you want to make sure that everybody thinks everything's on the up and up, is to make sure that you have as secure an election as possible, not as open an election as possible. So if you want people to accept your election results when they don't trust you, you need voter ID laws. You need to reduce things that could allow for fraud and things like that, rather than opening things up. Because if you open things up, you will create more fraud, or more opportunities for fraud. And there are people tracking that, and there are small numbers of fraudulent cases, and they're not enough to do anything. But that doesn't mean other people have to trust you, because they don't trust you, right? If they trusted you, then you wouldn't have any problems. But they don't trust you. They think that when you're doing these things, you're trying to bias the elections, and then you do them anyway, right? Anyways, that's my take on voting. Bye now.